flies in the Vaseline. Sometimes it blows my mind, but here we are on GenX Wasteland, also a collaboration with Aeon Byte. Of course, as the David Bowie book comes out in January, I will focus more on the GenX Wasteland and my Substack, get back to blogging. But this is a perfect topic for, well, for both shows, if you would. So you'll find it in both arenas. Of course, this is a private exclusive feed for members, for Patreons, YouTube members, and AB Prime members. So you get the whole enchilada. And as always, well, my name is Miguel Connor, and I'm just a guy. And with us today, I am very honored to have Richard Syrett to discuss a book that really, well, it was an amazing read. It had all the data and it hit me right in the soul, took me back in time, and gave me new vistas on the whole rock and roll Greek tragedy, if you would. And that book is Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone, Eerie Enigmas and Supernatural Secret from Rock's Darkest Corners. Richard, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Miguel, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure's all mine. And again, I was with you last year on Coast to Coast to talk about the King. And you certainly talk about the King as well in your book. Joining us too, as always, it is a pleasure to have my wing thing, Dr. Sherilyn Jones. Sherilyn, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Miguel, back from some long travels and interesting observations around the world. And we'll see how they tie into this, as you say, this continuing Greek tragedy that is rock and roll. So I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Richard.
You too, Dr. Jones.
Yes, indeed. It's almost like these stories are written in the stars. They're almost so predictable, if you would. So, Richard, tell us about why did you decide to write this book? What led you to write, put this out get this out from the ether, from the Akashic records, if you would?
How appropriate, yes. The book, Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone, is based on a podcast that was produced in the documentary style back in 2018 in conjunction with Westwood One and Chris Jericho, former wrestler, or maybe he's wrestling again, I'm not sure, but he's a terrific interviewer as well. He has a podcast network, and he's also a pretty fine musician. So in 2018, I produced 40 episodes, and since that time, people in a very nice way have been cajoling me to write a book, and I thought, let's revisit this territory, because rock and roll is such a rich vein to be mined in terms of, well, it's got all the ingredients. It has conspiracy, it has occult influences, it overlaps with intelligence agencies and things like the Tavistock Institute, and it all comes together, unexplained mysteries in rock, which is the unexplained mysteries aspect has been sort of the arena that I've been involved with for going on 40 years. So I kind of look at the book as the live album, or sorry, the podcast was kind of the live album, and the book is kind of the studio album. But it actually even predates all of that. It goes back to maybe 2015, and the book is dedicated to a gentleman by the name of R. Gary Patterson, who was a rock historian, musician. We became good friends. He was a regular on Coast to Coast, and we got together and decided we were going to produce a terrestrial radio program and hopefully syndicate it. It was originally called The Spirit of Rock, and we were on the cusp of launching it. There was a radio station in Knoxville, Tennessee that wanted to air the program, and almost on the eve of its launch, R. Gary Patterson passed away suddenly in May of 2017. So the book is dedicated to him. The very last chapter in the book is titled, "There Will Be No Barbecue," the telephone call that time cannot explain. And it's not a rock and roll conspiracy, but it's a very personal chapter. My last conversation with him, which, well, maybe we'll get into it if we have time, but it seems, to the best of my recollection, that telephone call came to me from Gary after he passed away. So that's a very long-winded answer, but that's kind of the genesis, the backstory of Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone.
Yeah, we can certainly cover it. Reminds me too of when David Bowie's father died. He got the phone call too, several phone calls. So this seems to be a medium, and of course that will be in the David Bowie book. But yeah, I mean, some of your not only is the again the conspiracy, the paranormal, the data that you put out, but again, the soul and heart you bring to it. For example, I'd always heard of, the famous plane crash of Leonard Skinner, and we all hear about it and tragic and all that, but your reconstruction of it was so emotional. I felt I was on that damn plane and my heart kept broken, and the bodies afterward, and the psychic damage to people and everything. It was intense, Richard, that recreation. I'm so
Well,
happy you gave it to us.
that means a lot, to have that kind of feedback back on the actual writing. I mentioned, it was based on the podcast, so I transcribed all 40 episodes,
Mhm.
and then I chose 16, and then I sort of looked for themes and put those into different sections in the book. There's a Beatles section, there's a curses and omens section, there's a mysterious death section, and then the premonitions and after death communications is section 4. But I didn't want to just transcribe it and here's the book. So I rewrote it. I
Mhm.
preserved all the interviews with the experts and the
Right.
musicians and the people that were there, but I kind of beefed up the narration, and I wanted to give it kind of a literary or even a cinematic type feel. So I appreciate your very generous praise.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful, poetic, and very intense. And of course, for the audience and a surprising nobody, Ronnie Van Zant had that second sight. As always, as many rock musicians, he knew his time would come. Of course, there's always, Elvis said that, David Bowie said that. They all say that, and of course, you're wondering, yeah, keep that lifestyle. You are going to die young, but then you wonder, they do have a second sight, don't they? A lot of times.
Well, particularly with Ronnie, as you say, his father believed he had second sight. I'm not going to live past 30. I'm not going to live past 30. And he wasn't just being flippant about it. I mean, he seemed to really own that statement. But you mentioned Elvis and others. Elvis's mother passed away at a very young age as well, roughly, I think, the same age, 42.
Mhm.
But nobody, to my recollection, not only embraced this idea that they weren't going to live past 30, but rushed headlong into that, fatalistic prediction, right up to the point of getting on that plane. And he didn't care who he dragged with him, it would appear. There's a story of Cassie Gaines, who was a backup singer, and her brother, Stevie Gaines, was a guitarist in Leonard Skinner. He replaced Ed King, who had just left a short time earlier. And both Stevie and Cassie died in that crash, along with Ronnie Van Zant. But Cassie
Mhm.
Gaines did not want to get on that plane. She had premonitions. She had horrible nightmares.
Mhm.
And Ronnie could be, quite frankly, a bit of a bully in that regard. And he said, "You're getting on that damn plane. If it's our time to go, it's our time to go." And it was, apparently.
It was indeed, and of course, this ties into the idea of. I think we have to be kind of grateful of where we are, Richard, because remember, people of our age, when we were young, planes were falling out of the sky a lot. Now you don't hear about it, and unfortunately, it took a lot of the great ones. Patsy Cline, Otis Redding. I've been to the Lake Winona, where his plane fell. Who else? Richie Valens, Jim
Jim
Croce, Buddy
Croce, yeah.
Holly,
Randy
so many.
Rhodes.
Randy, oh, good one. Randy Rhodes too. So many. And then you wonder again, these psychics like David Bowie and Elvis. Elvis would not get on a plane through the 60s until he had his own personal jet. David Bowie was afraid of flying for much of his career. Yeah, there is this horrible trope of the plane and the rock star. Um, but why don't we start with, I guess, the 800-pound gorilla, and that is the Beatles. I mean, when I was on your show, of course, I gave the famous choice: are you a Beatles person or an Elvis person? I myself used to be a Beatles person all my life. Now I'm an Elvis person, and now it's very hard for me to listen to the Beatles. They almost seem manufactured, except for John Lennon. I think if there was somebody who broke out from the programming and really fought so hard to get out and become authentic. I think it was Lennon, but tell us the Beatles and the idea that they were connected to Tavistock.
So again, the first section of the book is called The Beatles Enigma. And when I was producing the podcast, I wasn't cognizant of, looking for themes and eventually tying them together in a book. So I had to sort of lay out all 40 episodes looking for patterns, because that's what human beings do. And lo and behold, I had produced 4 episodes that would fit nicely into a Beatles section. So the Beatles Enigma, the first chapter is called Fab Four, or False Flag. The idea that you mentioned the word manufacturing, that's very appropriate. First, a bit of a caveat. I know that the Beatles, like Elvis, are a sacred cow for a lot of people. And for me, I'm a tremendous Beatles fan. I love them, and Elvis equally. In fact, in writing this book, it gave me a whole new appreciation for Elvis. But back to the Beatles. So the premise of this chapter, and it may seem outlandish to many people, is that Beatlemania, of course, part of the British invasion that washed ashore in early 1964, really sort of hitting its pinnacle when the Beatles performed before 78 million Americans who were glued to their TV set. That's 1 in 3 Americans at the time, 1 in 3. The British invasion was not just a metaphorical term. It was, in fact, an actual British invasion. If you go back to 1781, when the British lost the American colony, General Cornwallis surrendering to a French general, which is interesting, General Lafayette, not Washington, a French general. Topic for another show, perhaps, but does that mean they didn't officially give up the colony? Maybe not, because if you look backwards, through that dark mirror, you see many historical events that could be perceived as an attempt by the British Empire or the Crown to win back or take back the American colony. So we had, after 1781, we had the War of 1812, right, when the British invaded from Canada, burned down the White House. Certainly, they were still trying to get back the colony. And then you had the Civil War. The British, the City of London proper and the Bank of England funding both sides in the Civil War. Was that an attempt to divide and conquer? Various economic calamities all could be perceived as an attempt for the British to win back the American colony. That brings us to the 1960s, or certainly the post-war England, and the creation of the Tavistock Institute, which was this psychological think tank. Think of it as Sigmund Freud meets the British Ministry of Defense. Right. They were studying mass psychology, behavioral modification, brainwashing techniques. There's some overlap with the MK Ultra program in the United States. So they had arrived at an important determination that if you want to co-opt a movement, if you want to subvert a particular societal group like America's youth, you can try doing it through politics, but try having a teenager sit through a 3-hour political speech. But a 3-minute pop song that can bypass the analytical mind, that can immediately impact your nervous system, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your emotional state, particular specific musical notes and melodies can evoke rebellion, melancholy, sexual aggression. We are, it's no accident that, when young men are marched into war, the operative word there is march, with a drum. Mm-hmm. Music has an incredible power, not only for good, but sometimes for not so good reasons. So they understood this. The British Crown for shorthand, the Tavistock, MI6, whatever alphabet agency you want to insert there. And so I think they recognized they had these 4 very talented young lads from Liverpool, and I don't think they were witting participants, but they were weaponized. A friend of mine, Nelson Thal, who studied under the great media guru in Canada, Marshall McLuhan, he was his graduate student, and he's in the book in chapter 1. He says the Beatles weren't a band; they were software. And if you look at the way America's youth, 2.5 months after the Kennedy assassination, they were traumatized, they were vulnerable, both important ingredients in brainwashing, MK Ultra techniques, and so forth. If you look at the way the youth culture evolved, or you might argue devolved, in lockstep with the Beatles, the length of the hair grew longer, the clothes became more outlandish, the normalization of drugs, the questioning of authority, the questioning of institutions, the family structure, organized religion, all of these things. So the idea here, again, in summing up, is that the British invasion was a literal British invasion in the 1960s. Beatlemania was, at least in part, amplified or weaponized in order to subvert America's youth.
I think that's a good argument. Like you said, the United States was kind of on the ropes. The empire was starting to buckle with Kennedy, Vietnam, the continuous wars against the Reds and all that. And the Beatles just came in and like a virus, like you write in your book, trauma creates the void and culture fills it. And for a decade, no one filled it more completely than the Beatles. And we all know now that, like you said, going on the Ed Sullivan show and the girls screaming in the airport, that was manufactured. They saw how Elvis was with the screaming girls, and they put these actresses to get onto it. So a lot of it was certainly manufactured. And of course, their ideal on the culture was just was so intense, if you would, and also their evolution too. What do you think, Sherilyn? What do you think about the whole Beatles thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say here, and I want to hear more from you all before I go crazy on my own ideas here, but or feedback. But yeah, it's really interesting because so many things. But the writer and filmmaker Jay Weidner, his wife was a hired screamer at a Beatles
Oh,
concert.
really?
Yeah, so it's not just we've heard about this happening. There's direct testimony from sort of a big figure in the alternative media world that can confirm this. And I think that, as you're saying, Richard, these things were figured out a long time ago. This combination of music, of aggression, of mass movement of people. And it seems you've laid out several things in that timeline. There's been a continuing and an ongoing program by whoever it is, whether you want to say the Crown or secret societies or whomever in the UK, to maintain control of their colony. And the Beatles coming in after this long line in the 20th century of these wars and this development of mass media. And I mean, if you look back to World War I, where you can read, I still can't believe that he's held up as a hero, but you can read Churchill's letters where he's saying, we need to let the Lusitania be attacked. Don't do anything about it. We have to have these people in our war. What more control is there over a society than to order millions of young men to their deaths? I mean, if you want to say, oh, they don't have control over us, I'd call that control. I'd call that, the greatest kind of control. So these continuing cycles of trauma, and you see, as you pointed out, that there's something going on there with this entity trying to control its colony, or directing the program. And that's a whole rabbit hole in itself, where people say you can write a letter and not put a stamp on it. If you've heard this one, that the Crown still controls our post office somehow. You can, I don't know, but people say it goes much, much deep, very, very deep. And so it's really interesting to explore this avenue of it. So yeah, continue. I can't wait to hear more.
No, it's well said. Yeah, I know I'm getting mythical here, but we go to the Odyssey. Most people don't know that the Odyssey was fought because it wasn't Helen of Troy. Zeus wanted a eugenics program. He wanted to trim the population, have a manageable population to control. Who stops it? Artemis has a vision with all these dead men and destroyed societies. And she says, no, I'm stopping the wind, and I'm giving you the most impossible moral choice, Agamemnon. your daughter or these men's death, and we know what happened. So it's almost like this theme continues throughout history. And Richard, I think the culmination, and I agree with you, or the most symbolic one, the atomic bomb, has to be the White Album, right? I mean, that's my favorite Beatles album because it's so dark. You can almost hear them screaming in pain, screaming at the world. As you say, the White Album is the true mirror to what was happening to society, right?
Yeah, I think I described it as more as a seance than an album. And it really doesn't feel like a Beatles album. It's still brilliant because how could it not be? You had these four brilliant musicians, but it's almost like four solo albums kind of smashed together into one epic piece of vinyl. And I connect that White Album, obviously. Well, it's not my connection. I basically revisit the whole Charlie Manson murder spree of 1969. Now, I could have written an entirely different version of that chapter involving MK Ultra, and I'm probably going to save that for a volume 2 if this is received well and people continue to have an appetite for it. But in this chapter, I talk about Charlie Manson and the family. I interviewed perhaps the youngest a member of the Manson family, Diane Lake, who was known as Snake. I think she was 15 when she got lured into Charlie's clutches. She was basically just kind of given up by her parents, who were hippies and free love, and hey, you want to go and wander around on your own at the age of 15? Go ahead. I mean, a very different time. But she talks about Manson after he recruited the family and drove them down to the ranch, the Spawn Ranch, this old movie set, and they would sit under the stars, and Manson would play the White Album endlessly, backwards and forwards, and talking about how the Beatles were communicating with him telepathically, and the song Blackbird, which was, McCartney, I think, has said as much, that it was about, in part, the civil rights movement in the United States, but Manson sort of amplified that message to, it's time for the Black people to rise up, or the Black people are about to rise up. And he was also, of course, hearing Helter Skelter, and that was his word for this race war, this apocalypse. Never mind that it was all about an amusement ride and a kind of a roller coaster, a UK term for a roller coaster. And so the idea was that Manson would take his family, they would descend into some subterranean lair and wait out this race war. And then after it was finished, Manson and the family would come to the surface once more, and where Manson would be welcomed as sort of the second coming, or as a messiah. Now, one can argue whether that was the I guess the more prosaic explanation as to what happened, that was Manson's defense, but it was all sort of conjured, or it was made up, essentially.
Right.
And that what was really behind this was, an MK Ultra project. I've spoken with an MK Ultra survivor on the podcast recently, who claims that when she was being subjected to this MK Ultra psychological torture, Manson was also attached to that program. He was there, along with Michael Aquino, of course, the Satanist, who achieved a very high rank in the U.S. military. So again, that's maybe for another chapter, but I really focus on Manson's twisted mind and how he took songs like Blackbird and Helter Skelter and Sexy Sadie, and kind of made them his own and used them, weaponized them to convince the other members of the Manson family to go along with his murderous scheme.
Yeah, I would definitely do the MK Ultra. I mean, of course, Polanski gets completely off the hook when there's so much, but I mean, there's so much we could do in Manson. But yeah, it's almost like it's a symbolical thing, because again, this was as you say, it was a mirror held to a world falling apart. The program at work, American society, Western society, was basically falling at its seams. It was sick. We were killing each other. We were going crazy. The baby boomers who had the most money and power were completely dropping the ball. It was yeah, the demolition of our culture was working well, and of course this ties into Manson and so forth. If someone said Manson was the end, showed us that the hippie movement had failed. It was the death promise. And also you also deal with Paul being dead, which of course is, I don't know if we want to say it's kind of a fun conspiracy, but it's still a conspiracy, right, Richard?
Well, yeah, I always issue this caveat. A bit of a spoiler alert. I reveal this in the chapter. I don't believe Paul McCartney died in a car crash in November of 1966 and was replaced by an exact duplicate. Because in order to believe that, you'd have to believe, I don't know, the executives at EMI or George Martin or Brian Epstein or the three surviving Beatles managed to find someone not only who looked almost exactly like Paul McCartney and sounded like Paul McCartney, but also played left-handed bass and was arguably more talented than the original Paul McCartney.
Okay.
The original Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, magnus opus. It is the most covered song in popular music history, I believe, something like 200 versions. However, post 1966, with the faux Paul, the fake Paul, you have Let It Be and Hey Jude and The Long and Winding Road and all of his songs and material with Wings, excuse me, and his solo career. So it's a bit of a stretch. However, it is either, I mean, the clues are real. The breadcrumbs are real. The backmasking, I Buried Paul, or Turn Me On Dead Man, if you play Strawberry Fields backwards, or Dream Revolution Number 9.
Mm-hmm.
The clues laid out on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, it's a funereal scene. There's a dozen clues there screaming at you that Paul is dead and was replaced by a lookalike. Abbey Road, same thing. He's barefoot walking across the street. Where the others are wearing shoes. That's because you put it, when you bury somebody, they're buried in bare feet. You don't put shoes on someone. Smoking a cigarette with his right hand when he was left-handed. The Volkswagen parked on the side of the road with a license plate 28IF. He would have been 28 if he had lived. The
Lennon
clues
looked like an undertaker, dressed like an undertaker, right? But yeah, there's so much.
Yeah, I mean, the clues are real. The question is, why were they put there? Was it clever marketing? Well, perhaps. It certainly worked. You had millions of fans buying albums just to listen or look for the clues. There's also, I think, maybe a darker angle here, and that has to do with how this would have been the perfect laboratory to study brainwashing by some intelligence group. Because once this story took off, and it began on a college campus in Iowa, Davenport University, somebody wrote a column about all the different clues. And pretty soon, that newspaper was being passed around and everyone was talking about it on college campuses. And then somebody called into a radio station in Detroit where DJ Roby Young was broadcasting. And this was all new to him. This happened in 1969, keeping in mind the origin of the rumor begins in November of 1966 when McCartney is killed in this car crash, decapitated by some accounts. Roby Young had never heard these clues before. And so the phone lines lit up. A couple of weeks later, the same thing happens again, this time at WABC in New York, a 50,000 watt blowtorch station that reached 40 states at night. And I'm sorry, let me back up. I said Roby Young. The Detroit DJ was Russ Gibb. The New York DJ was Roby Young. He was either fired on the air or shortly after his shift ended by the program director because he broke format. He was supposed to spin records, but he suspended the format to take all of these calls. And so it just takes off from there. Now, even though I don't believe McCartney died, it's fascinating because this is decades and decades before social media, decades and decades before the advent of the internet. And yet this rumor, this conspiracy which I think is kind of the prototype for viral conspiracies. It lives to this day, 6 decades later, and there are still legions of people who believe McCartney was replaced, and there's forensic analysis of McCartney's voice prints and photographs when he's with his girlfriend at the time. Was it Jane Asher? Look, in 1966, he's only a couple inches taller than Asher. Then post 1966, he's towering above her. It can't be the same Paul. The legends or the clues are real, but the darker, sinister angle might be this psyop. What a great way for intelligence agencies to sit back and watch how they kind of get the ball rolling, and then they let people just kind of pick it up and run with it all on their own. And they don't have to do anything else. They just sit back and watch it. If you want to, again, manipulate society, using mass psychology, what a great test, a beta test, if you will, than the whole Paul is dead legend. It's 60 years on and we're still following our noses.
We always will. I mean, there are people who still think that Alexander the Great was poisoned by Aristotle. That will never be settled. We'll be talking about Manson and Joan Bennett Ramsey. Sometimes you think maybe, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you know, Richard, that these MK government powers, they know that magic's real. They know there's a symbolical world, archetypal world as above that we can bring down that almost takes over reality itself. And it's part of their genius because symbols is what rules our mind and so forth. And the great example in your book, again, the recreation was chilling, was the other ending of the 60s era and maybe the ending of the innocence of the American psyche or the North American psyche was Altamont. You had Manson on one side ending it, that destructive force fueled by the Beatles. Then you've got Altamont, and that one is that is so ripe with symbolism. Don McLean talks about it in American Pie, that it was a satanic ritual. He was writing about that in the early 70s. And yes, you've got the Rolling Stones who were dabbling with Satanists. You've got Mick Jagger, the priest, the sacrificial person to what? The Hells Angels, the demons. They're singing all these songs, Give Me Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil. So on one level, you've got this incredible satanic ritual to end the American innocence. On the other one, you've got this tragedy that also ended the American innocence, even on the ground, right?
Yeah, I call the chapter, or I titled the chapter, Blood Altar at the Speedway. The Rolling Stones, the free concert at Altamont, and the omen that will not fade away. The last part is kind of a play on words. Will Not Fade Away was a Buddy Holly song that they covered. It is, you look at this whole tableau of this beaten down racetrack in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, the whole concept was just doomed from the outset. And first of all, for those not familiar, so the Rolling Stones, when they arrived in America in the late fall of 1969, their finances were a mess. They were pretty much flat broke. So they started charging an exorbitant. I mean, if you ever look at those old concert posters, I mean, you could go and see, Led Zeppelin, I don't know, the Blues Breakers, some other bands, 5-6 bands at the Fillmore East or something for like, $30.
Right. Or maybe
less.
Yeah.
Or $15. Yeah. But the Stones, I mean, I think they began the tour at Madison Square Gardens, and from the outset, people were complaining. They were gouging. And the Stones, I think, well, Mick Jagger was really the sort of the brain trust. He understood that sentiment. And so he decided that there was going to be a free concert at the end. It would also provide the, I guess, the denouement for the Maisel brothers film, Gimme Shelter. So they needed a big finale, and the free concert was going to be that. The only problem was when he announced there would be a free concert, there was no game plan. There was nothing in place. I think everyone was shocked by that off the cuff remark. And so they had to scramble, and they ended up not with their first choice, second choice, third choice, but they ended up with the Altamont Speedway. And they crammed 300,000 souls into that basin. It was cold. It was muddy. There was bad acid going around. There weren't enough porta potties. There wasn't enough water. There wasn't enough food.
Right.
And then to top it off, they took the advice from the Grateful Dead and kind of misinterpreted the advice. The Dead told them, the Stones or Mick, that, the Hells Angels help us out from time to time. There was no sort of formal contract between the Grateful Dead and the Hells Angels,
Right.
but the Stones paid. It ended up being the San Jose chapter. This was a brand new chapter that had broken away from the Oakland chapter. So they were pledges. They were not full members of the Hells Angels. So they had a lot to prove, and in their mind, the more pool cues you break over the head of somebody, the better you are. So they paid them in beer, hundreds of cases of beer. And there they are on their choppers surrounding the Rolling Stones. Well, and also Jefferson Airplane performed and some other bands, but they were drunk and they were itching for violence before the Rolling Stones ever even took the stage. And so all of this confluence of these bad decisions, including the construction of the stage, which was far too low for the venue. There was no barrier between the Stones and the crowd. And because of the grade of this bowl, people were just, because of gravity, were just kind of like being pushed down towards the stage. Just a deadly cocktail from the get-go. And then along comes this young African-American, Meredith Hunter, in this lime green suit. And you can see this all play out in the film Gimme Shelter. In fact, it was used, I believe, in the hearing. Adam Pizzaro, the member of the Hells Angels who stabbed Meredith Hunter after he started brandishing his .22 revolver. I mean, I think the poor kid was just frightened out of his wits. He was being, through no fault of his own, pushed towards the stage. And then he got into an altercation. He's stabbed 6 times by Pizzaro and then beaten with pool cues and chains. And concert goers lift up his limp, bloodied body and lay it at the feet of Keith Richards on the stage. And the Stones just keep playing. And later they would say, well, the lights were in our eyes. We couldn't see what was going on. Something that didn't make it into the book, because I learned this afterwards, was there was an all-girls band. I believe they were a creation of Frank Zappa. They played in Hollywood. They were called the GTOs. The acronym or the initial stand for Girls Together Outrageously, which is a mouthful. So GTOs is a better name. They were at a party several nights before the Altamont concert, and one of them did a tarot card reading for Mick and Keith. And I don't know a lot about the tarot, but at some point the Tower card was presented. Oh, wow. And not a good sign. Mick and Keith knew something about the tarot. They were absolutely horrified and mortified and shaken, and left the party. But it was too late. The show has to go on. The show must go on. And it did.
Yeah, it's chilling. And of course, I've heard that George Lucas was one of was doing the camera there. You wonder what deals he made with the stars. And of course, the most chilling thing, Richard, is the ending. You've got Mick Jagger flying off in the helicopter after the concert, and poor Meredith in this body in a makeshift office waiting for somebody to come get him. That was like, oh my, that's heaven and hell right there.
Right. Well, if you watch the film Gimme Shelter, you see this helicopter lifting off and taking off, and we were led to believe, the way the film was constructed, that was them trying to, rush Meredith Hunter to a hospital to
Yeah.
receive some medical aid, but it wasn't. That helicopter was for the Rolling Stones only, and that was the Rolling Stones lifting off with, as you say, Meredith Hunter, his body not yet cold, left behind. It would take hours and hours because of the traffic and so forth for the
It brought
ambulance to find
tears
her.
to my eyes. It was just horror.
Yeah.
And I know this is kind of a side note, Richard, but one thing I like and didn't like about David Bowie, he was very vicious. People forget, and one of the reasons he did Diamond Dogs is he wanted to prove that he could copy and improve on the Rolling Stones sound, and he plays the guitar and all that. Because one of his things, he loved dethroning other people and destroying their careers if they cross, even friends. I always thought Diamond Dogs kind of did that, because after Diamond Dogs, it's almost like the Rolling Stone mystique disappeared, if you know what I mean. They never had it after the 75. Obviously, as you write, getting rid of Brian Jones was also not a very smart idea. The soul of the Rolling Stones. But anyway, on a side note, I always have a little Schadenfreude towards the Rolling Stones that David Bowie kind of unmasked them as, you guys aren't original. I can copy your damn sound and improve on it for.
Wow. You know what? Before I write volume 2, Miguel, I'm going to get you to maybe co-author with me. You've got an incredible depth of knowledge with regards to all of this stuff. I could just sit back and listen to you, man.
Oh, no.
You're a font of knowledge. I didn't know that about Bowie, that he had that. I guess my David Bowie knowledge really has to do with Young Americans, which I think is kind of it's an homage, I guess, to Motown and different sounds.
Right.
But that to me is just a brilliant piece of artistry. But I had no idea. Well, you know what? That goes with the territory, right? Genius can be hard to live with, and the same thing that made Mozart great, I suppose. The polar opposite also made Jack Ripper very proficient and efficient with what he did.
Yeah. Well, Bowie had a huge, like Elvis, what did Jung say? The bigger the light, the bigger the shadow you cast. And he had a big one. And also he went to a fortune teller in the late 70s, and fortune teller said, you're going to be dead at 69. And Bowie's like, I'll take it. It's better than most of my contemporaries, like, T-Rex and all these other guys that are, and Elvis, that are dropping like flies around me. So, but Sherilyn, do you have a question you want to jump in? Are you going to go break all your Rolling Stone CDs, I hope, now?
No, I think I came to terms with the that loving the sinner and hating the sin, or something like that. Being able to listen to this music and realize that there's aspects of it that are so manufactured and pretty dark. And I wanted to comment on a couple of things. One was the conspiracy aspect of this, where whether it's Paul or landing on the moon, or you name it, you name the conspiracy. A lot of this, I think, as you mentioned, I think it in itself is an experiment to see how we will react, to see what we will create. So you put something out there that's so obvious and egregious, all these messages, all these clues, all this right in your face, and then you see what people will do with it. It doesn't have to mean that Paul's dead or not dead, but you see then you have a data set, and you can watch how people choose sides. You can watch how people will, abandon former principles to join another one, and who's able to see both of those sides and not claim either one. I mean, it's just a brilliant way to start parsing the population and see who you can trick and who you can't, and who's going to choose sides, and then what to sell to them next. I mean, I'm thinking of the moon landing, right? And all the ridiculous in your face, things that look like ceiling fans and things that don't, just, it's so bad, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't land on the moon. It meant that this is the footage that the plebes get, right? So it doesn't have to mean one thing or the other. So I find that really fascinating that you take that sort of in between tack and go, I don't necessarily think it means he's dead, or I don't think he's dead, but somebody certainly knew what they were doing when they stuffed all of this information in. The other thing was this aspect of these stars as our gods, as our new sort of divine pantheon, this new Greek, or not even, doesn't even have to be Greek, but this ritualistic way that we're presented with these people. And I think that all of that knowledge of how, again, the music and the cadence and the ritual and the scenery, all comes together to create reality, was all held within these secret societies. That's they've known this for a long time, and it seems that a lot of these quote stars, whether they're because they have some sort of divine or psychic gift, and or because they have seen behind that curtain, they've seen the Wizard of Oz, that they start reacting. They start saying, either rejecting it or saying things, they go off script, and then they're the ones that get slated for the ritual sacrifice. Either way it works. It's just these rituals get played out over and over again, and it's very clearly something more going on than entertainment.
I think it's a brilliant analysis. I mean, if you look back again, I mentioned the American Revolutionary War, and move ahead to the 1960s. So the Crown realized, instead of muskets and redcoats, we're going to use microphones and Rickenbacker guitars, and then you're going to put this band on the Ed Sullivan stage before 78 million Americans. That's so primitive now. With the iPhone, everyone is sleeping with it next to their head. They don't need, one platform to amplify it. They've got 4 billion platforms, and we're giving them all of this. It's almost like biofeedback. They know what we're scrolling through, when we pause to scroll at something. How much of the song do we listen to before we move to the next song? What's on our playlist? We're giving them everything they need.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah. And I do love, I should say that it was Canadians that came down and burned the White House. I think it's one of the funniest stories. And my rule is very simple. Since Canada gave us Rush, I will forgive Canada for everything from now to the end of my life. It's very simple. Canada, as long as I got Rush out of it. So that's all that matters. And Richard, of all, your book, of course, deals with a lot of conspiracies. Some we've talked. We should mention, of course, there's Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain. You talk about Led Zeppelin, again, the cautionary tale. Like, was it because of their lifestyle, or was it because of Jimmy Page playing with these forces? And of course, you always bring up paranormal things that happen. You're not like, you bring out, there was supernatural shit all over the place. But if you had to, and Elvis too, your chapter on Elvis, is there any of these conspiracies that you are pretty much maybe 99% saying they were murdered? Or where are you with these? For me, Kurt Cobain, 99%. Yep. Courtney did it.
Allegedly, reportedly, in our opinion. Never been proved in court, and she's always denied it. But I would say, excuse me, I would say the Kurt Cobain case desperately needs to be revisited. Sorry about that. The others are tricky. Even Kurt Cobain would be tricky to reopen. He was cremated conveniently. However, you could still, I think, impanel a grand jury. There are enough people still around, still alive, including their lawyer, Kurt and Courtney's lawyer, Rosemary Carroll, who admitted her conversation with investigator Tom Grant was recorded, in which she discusses discovering handwriting practice sheets in Courtney Love's backpack, allegedly, which takes you back to the so-called suicide note. The first 95% of it doesn't read like a suicide note. It reads more like a love letter to his fans and an apology as to why he's, backing away from the music industry to spend more time, maybe, with Frances Bean, his daughter. The last 5% of that letter reads overtly like, a final goodbye. Courtney, you're better off without me. Frances Bean, you're better off without me. That handwriting style does not match the main body of the suicide note. Independent forensic handwriting analysts have looked at it, have all concluded the same thing, not in a court of law, mind you. So there's that. There's the again, going back to Rosemary Carroll, she said that Kurt had changed his will. It hadn't gone into effect because he hadn't signed it, and he didn't live long enough to sign it. Had it gone into effect, all of his assets, the billions in future royalties, would have gone directly to Frances Bean. So as it stands, a lot of that went to Courtney. There is the whole death scene or crime scene, if you will. The shotgun that he used allegedly to take his own life. I don't know if you've ever held a shotgun in your hands. I'm not a hunter, but I have held a shotgun. I'm trying to imagine how you would turn that around, put the business end in your mouth, and then reach, unless you have arms like Abraham Lincoln, reach the trigger. But it gets even worse, because to the end of the barrel, you have to add another 6 inches, because there was what I believe is called a flash suppressor that was screwed into the end of the barrel. So that even makes it more unlikely. Now you could argue, well, maybe he used hit the big toe of his foot, but he was found with both shoes on. According to the autopsy, he had somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 3 times a lethal dose of, I'm going to be careful, I don't want to use the H word, because apparently the algorithms don't like that, but it synthesizes as morphine in the bloodstream. Right. He would have been unconscious within seconds. So how does he manage to handle that weapon? But at the same time, how does he manage to put all of his drug paraphernalia away nice and neatly? So many questions. And I'll leave you with this. The Nick Broomfield documentary, Kurt and Courtney, which was released, I believe, in 1997, so 3 years after Kurt's death, features an interview with quite a character by the name of Eldon Hoke. Eldon Hoke's stage name was El Duce. He played in a kind of a shock rock band. And one could argue maybe not the most reliable of witnesses, but he testified on film that allegedly Courtney Love offered him X number of dollars. I can't remember the figure, 10,000, 50,000. I'm not sure. It's in the book. Mm-hmm. To kill Kurt with a shotgun. And on film, he said that he laughed and said to Courtney, "You can't be serious," to which she allegedly replied, "I'm as serious as a heart attack." Several days after that sequence was filmed for the documentary, Eldon Hoke, a.k.a. El Duce, was found dead, face down on a railroad track, hit from behind by a freight train. So people will have to make up their own minds on this. This is not a manifesto. I don't claim to know the truth. I'm just pulling on loose threads, and I hope people will tug on those.
Yeah, there's a lot of one, and they're very well. And what you were saying also, Sherilyn, about singers, I use that in my David Bowie book. I didn't like him because I knew him. I liked him because he helped me know myself. So these dark figures will help you know yourself. And don't get me wrong, the more I studied Bowie, the more in love I fell with him, because I saw this, like many rock stars, this wounded healer who had so much trauma and so much anger, but at the end of the day, they tried their best and they really transcended and brought so much light into the world. So and speaking of your Elvis reconstruction is also wonderful. I liked it a lot too. I think on Coast to Coast, I said, it's a good argument. There are many good arguments. I think that he knew he was going to die, and that was it. The only thing I thought it was interesting is that great reconstruction of everything, Richard. And you talk about how Elvis went to see this mailman, kept him at the gate of Graceland, perfect time for an assassin to come in and all that. I was like, that would make sense. But in my head, it was simply like, that wouldn't be necessary because you and I both agree the rat was Joe Esposito. Probably. He was the one that was going to be on the axe. He was the one that was a snitch to Colonel Parker. You know what I mean? So I always thought, no, and to surprise Elvis, it would have had to be somebody he knew, an inside job. And Graceland's a small place and it's always busy. So that was my only tweak to your reconstruction that I would have changed.
That's good to know. Thank you for that. That's important feedback. I have to thank also, these are not, I didn't do real heavy lifting on the research. I have to say that because again, this is based on a podcast, and I interviewed some fantastic researchers. Steve Ubaney, for example, I think wrote one of the definitive books on, the idea that Elvis was murdered, called "Who Murdered Elvis Presley" or "Who Murdered Elvis." Steve Ubaney and Dave Gardner, a UK author, journalist, investigative journalist. So those reconstructions and those timelines are theirs, but the Esposito angle, I don't address that in the book, but for the updated and revised edition, I'm gonna get you involved, Miguel.
He's kissing him. It was always you, Joe. It was always you, like the Godfather or something like that. Yeah, there's so many ways you can see. You could see Elvis in so many different. I mean, again, you reach these mythological levels, and they almost, you might say, break reality, and you can retcon it and all that. And with Elvis is endless. I mean, my other argument too is the idea that he was worth more dead than alive. And I'm always thinking, like, why do people say that? Because yes, he had his music, merchandise, but people forget that he brought tens of millions of dollars every year touring. So you need it. And I mean, and Priscilla almost went broke afterwards because she didn't have that third because she took over the estate. Yeah. But anyway, that's, again, we could argue till the cows come home.
My understanding, and you can disabuse me of this, but my understanding is most of the merchandising was controlled by Colonel Tom. He created, I think it was called Boxcar Productions. And this is the early days. I mean, now we just take it for granted. You're going to see the image on a T-shirt or on a button, but this was kind of the early days of that. I mean, yes, there was some great merchandising with the Beatles in the 1960s, lunch pails and things, but in America, I mean, I think the Colonel really capitalized that in a big way. And I think he realized after he ran Elvis into the ground, morally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, dragging him out of bed when he didn't feel up to performing and sticking his head in a bucket of ice and pushing him out onto the stage. I think he realized, he's becoming unreliable. I think the mob was starting to squeeze the Colonel because supposedly the FBI had infiltrated his entourage in Vegas to spy on them. He had Elvis there performing to pay off his gambling debts. And I think the mob was really starting to squeeze the Colonel in that regard.
Yeah. And the feds might have been worried. If Elvis was an informant, they'd be worried because he was kind of out of control. So, and then of course there's the angle, if Elvis really was going to reboot his career, he was going to fire the Colonel, Esposito, he was going to do, Elvis and Bowie knew how to reinvent themselves, but the old guard would be like, oh no, we have no money. We better do something. So there was certainly motive, and Priscilla too. He was changing the will. He was going to go around Priscilla. Some say she might have been part of it. I don't know.
That's what's really ultimately very tragic about Elvis. I think he just felt so alone. He had a large extended family. Many of them lived on the property. Many of them were sucking at the teat of Elvis Presley enterprises or whatever. I think he just felt betrayed and alone ultimately.
Yeah. I think Steve Hodges or Joe Hodges was somebody, probably his only friend at the time, sometimes Vernon, but yeah, it was, that's who he was. He was an introvert. Well, as we get at the top of the hour, I wanted to make sure that we include the part of the last phone call. Richard, tell us about that.
So R. Gary Patterson, rock historian, the Fox Mulder of rock, wrote the definitive book on the whole Paul is dead legend called The Walrus Was Paul. He and I became friends mainly on air. I didn't actually meet him face to face until about 2015. When he came to Toronto, he was a regular on Coast to Coast. So when we met face to face, we came up with this idea to launch a terrestrial radio program, The Spirit of Rock. We're almost getting ready to launch it when Gary dies. But before he died, he called me on a Friday, May 26th. And I remember walking from room to room with the telephone to my ear, and the whole, even looking back now, it's just getting more and more surreal as the days go by. And here we are 9 years later. But I felt almost like, as I look back, I was in some sort of a trance or a dream state. I'm wandering from room to room with this phone attached to my ear, and I look around, and all of a sudden I'm in the kitchen. The next thing I know, I'm in the cellar in my office. And Gary's talking to me about this upcoming meeting we were supposed to have with the program director in Knoxville. But he called to tell me that the meeting had been rescheduled because we were heading into Memorial Day weekend. And so on the Monday, that would be Memorial Day, there'd be no meeting. So along the way, he's telling me some strange things. Richard, you're a really cool dad. And, Richard, you and I are a really big deal. And I thought, okay, that's Gary's way of, I guess, building us up and making me feel good. That's what Gary did. And, but before he hung up, I said, Gary, Memorial Day weekend, are you going to have a barbecue? I mean, when I think of Memorial Day weekend, I think of parades and obviously commemorating the fallen veterans, but also I think of family barbecues. And for the first time ever that I'd known Gary, he got kind of curt with me, and he just blurted it out. There'll be no barbecue. And I thought, oh, geez, did I step in a landmine? Is there some family dispute going on? Anyway, hung up the phone. Those were basically the last words we spoke. I figured I'd speak with him again. And I should point out, at this time, as I'm wandering around, I realized it's very late at night. Gary would call me sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night, and that was fine. The next morning, I wake up, and it's about 7 o'clock, and I got a Facebook message from a colleague of mine who was, at that time, a guest host on Coast to Coast AM, Dave Schrader. Funnily enough, I completely slept through the show that night, which never happens. I just went into a deep sleep along with my wife, the mighty Aphrodite. We missed the broadcast. Had we heard it, we would have realized that Gary had passed away on that Friday. But I missed it. So Dave Schrader Facebook messages me and says, I thought you'd like to hear it from a friend. Gary passed away yesterday. I saw the message and I laughed. I said, come on, I just talked to him last night. I immediately called Gary, get his outgoing message. Anyway, it was true. He died. I flew down to the funeral. I'm kind of rushing ahead here, but I flew down to the funeral in Oliver Springs, Tennessee, this little coal mining Civil War era town. There's Gary decked out in a beautiful stainless steel blue casket, his Fender guitar on a stand, his brother Michael in the receiving line. I went up, introduced myself to Michael. He thanked me for coming all the way from Toronto. I didn't want to tell him that I'd received a call, the same day that Gary had died. I just said, the last time I spoke to your brother, he said something kind of strange to me, and I thought maybe you could help me fill in the gaps. I asked him if he was going to have a barbecue on Memorial Day weekend, and he got kind of mad at me. He said, there'll be no barbecue. Do you have any idea why he would say that? And Michael immediately looked confused, and he said, that makes no sense. He spent all that day looking for a brand new barbecue. He found, when he spent like $500, he spent the rest of the afternoon putting it together with my son, his nephew, on the back porch. And I thought, well, that is strange. And I said, when did your brother pass away on that Friday? And he says, well, as best as we can figure, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm thinking 5 o'clock. It was well after dark when he called me. It was 9 or 10. So was that Gary reaching out from the other side? Because was he angry because he knew, even though he had just spent $500 on a barbecue, there wasn't going to be one because he wasn't going to be around. I'm conflicted by that, and well, maybe not every day, but every few days I think about it, and I'm still troubled by it.
No, it's a very touching. I understand, Richard. When my best friend and my soulmate died in 2001, he was in Pakistan. No, he was in Afghanistan working as a journalist, for the war. And he Skyped me in the middle of the night, and he kept saying, Miguel, pick up, pick up, pick up. I was like, I'm too tired to pick up. And when I woke up, he'd been killed. He knew. And right, we're always going to wonder, should we've picked up? Should we have reached out to them? Because they knew they were going to the other side, right? Or they were already there. But
Already there, it would
was like
appear.
we failed them. It's haunted me for 25 years. So I'm sure it's going to haunt you forever, right?
Yeah.
But we're humans. We're flawed. This is who we are.
Indeed we are. Indeed we are.
So bittersweet. And yes, for the audience, please read his book. It is bittersweet. I want to go back there. I want to help Ronnie Van Zant not get on the plane. I want to help Jimi Hendrix. I want these poor, broken but talented souls. I want to tell Brian Jones, don't get in the pool. You've got some neurological, you wish you could help these poor things that really helped us and helped humanity.
They got sucked in and spat out by the machine.
They did. I mean, and Robert Plant did not deserve to lose his son because some other bandmate was screwing around with dark powers. It's, it's the world we is. So any last questions or remark from you, Sherilyn?
Well, I'm just, it's a fascinating conversation. And I love the way you look at so many different aspects, the same thematic content with so many of these people that have been presented to us as our new stars, our new gods. And then hopefully it can help us learn something about our own gifts, that when we possess these types of gifts and this type of genius, which genius doesn't mean smart or talent, it means ability to channel something, right? So when we see that in our own lives, to be aware that even though it's a gift, that we have to be wary of how we share it, because there's always something, as Castaneda call it, the predator. There's something hungry in the universe that tends to feed on things like this. And it's not to smother it or to get rid of it, but just to be mindful of how we use it and to protect ourselves. And so I don't know what part of these people's stories was fated in a sense, right? That they, as you said, Bowie said, you're going to die when you're 69. He said, okay, I'll do that. So some of them seem to have to be resigned to sharing in the ways that they will, and others seem to be a little more caught off guard by how their journey ends. But I think that, that there's a lot of lessons to be learned in there. And I just want to end or for myself to share something that is a confirmation of some of your research from a firsthand account. Well, secondhand, but it was firsthand. And again, this was before social media and before anyone was talking about this with Kurt Cobain. I worked in live music for about 3 years, and I knew some folks, and I got to meet the man. His name was Larry, who had been Nirvana's tour manager on their last European tour. This was in September, the year Kurt Cobain had died. And he was so angry and at Courtney Love. And I mean, I don't know if he used the word she killed him, but he just kept saying that bitch, that bitch, that bitch. And what are you saying? Because nobody was talking about this at the time. And he said that when they were on their last European tour, that she would continually feed him drugs, even though she knew he was trying to get clean. And when he overdosed in Rome, she called the media before she called the ambulance. That was firsthand testimony that he observed. And it was really wild because as a synchro mystic, as a sync, at the time he was in Orlando as a tour manager for ZZ Top. So we went downstairs. I'll introduce you to the band. We went down there, and who's there with ZZ Top? Rowdy Roddy Piper, the They Live, the take off your glasses. So it was one of my first experience of, and I didn't even know that movie. I knew none of this at the time, but it was one of my first experiences of having the glasses taken off. And then years later, finding out, as you said, there's all this evidence that this person did meet, that it was foul play in some way. So anyhow, there's a lot of proof out there in the world. And thank you for bringing that forward so we can consider what we can learn from it in our own lives and review what we've been handed, what we've been fed all these years so that we can make better decisions going forward. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Very eloquent.
Yes. And like I said, what Richard does best is he brings the humanity of these individuals. They weren't gods. They were just humans doing the best they can. They probably needed more help, but right? They were stuck in Babylon, if you would, in a system that drains your soul and spits you out. So,
Right. I mean, I try to compartmentalize because I still love the Rolling Stones music. I think their latest
oh
album,
yeah,
Foreign Tongues, is an absolute triumph. And I try to imagine myself, I mean, as an Orthodox Christian. We're told we cannot judge. We must not judge others. That's for God. And I try to think of, my best attributes, whatever they are, and my worst attributes, which are many. If they were
yeah,
amplified, if I was performing before 50,000 people every other night and I had surrounded by sycophants who never told me no, would I fare any better than, David Bowie or Keith Richards or any? Probably not. Probably I would probably do far worse. So I cannot judge them. They are human beings.
agreed. Well, look at the bright side. Keith Richard probably has another 1,000 years where he could still convert to Christianity. So
I always ask myself, what kind of world are we going to leave Keith?
exactly. So there's plenty of time for Keith to straighten himself out.
It'll be him and the cockroaches, right? Are you two?
Yeah, that's it. That'll be the end of the world. So, well, awesome. Well, this has been really a great conversation on so many levels. First, I'd like to say, Sherilyn, as always, thanks for being my wing thing.
Thank you so much. A fascinating conversation. I can't wait to read the book, Richard.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Nice to meet you.
Yes, Richard, really appreciate you coming on. I've got show notes, where to get your book, your website, of course. Anything else, anywhere else you want to send people, or that's it?
I've got a YouTube channel at Strange Planet Radio. I think you've got all the links. Strangeplanet.ca is the website. There's also a newsletter, a free monthly newsletter they can subscribe to when we take a little deeper dive into some of these stories. So, what a great host, Miguel. I really enjoyed spending some time with you. Thank you.
No, it's so easy when you write books like that, man. You made my job very easy, so I really appreciate it. And yes, the book is Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone, Eerie Enigmas, and Supernatural Secret from Rock's Darkest Corners. We only covered some of it. There's Robert Johnson. There's much more in the book that you'll enjoy. And again, the human element it'll make you see things different. So yeah, Richard, thanks for writing this book and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you again.
Join Patreon, AB Prime, or YouTube membership for all complete episodes and other Aeonic rewards.